WOAI. This is Sidebar with former Bexar County DA Nico Jorge, trial lawyer, managing partner of LaHood Norton Law Group, and George Araujo, scholar, former chemist, and pharmaceutical researcher and director. Okay, after 14 defeats, Kevin McCarthy won, I guess, the House Speaker finally by granting a few concessions. That was interesting. It happened late. And there are two sides to the story, gentlemen, and I hope that we get to talk about both of them because, you know, I listen to a lot of people that are the Democrats, the liberals, and they were like, this is embarrassing. How could they, how could they do this? Why don't they just, give it up? And on the other hand, people that understood the things that were happening were like, wow, this is politics at its best. This is the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to fight for what you want.
Yeah. I think there's more than two perspectives. I think there's just observations. I mean, because people have different observations and perspectives. There's not two sides, I meant to say. There's just different perspectives from it. Anything you put under stress, if done properly, gets stronger. Your brain, your body, your spirit, your faith. So why wouldn't government put under stress become stronger? That's the way that this government was set up. I don't think it was the end of the world. I mean, of course you're going to get the left-leaning people and the Democrats criticizing it. Harold Ford didn't. I mean, the guy, is his name Harold Ford? Harold on the 5? Yeah. I like him. I really do like him. He's really a temperate. I don't think he realizes it, but he's not a Democrat anymore. But he just seems so reasonable, and he's kind of an old-school blue dog Democrat. But all that to say is I don't think there was anything bad about this. I think, as George is probably going to comment on, there were a lot of things with the speakership position that had kind of gone amok. And this kind of equaled it back. I've heard other people say that these people were just a bunch of nobodies trying to get their 5 minutes of fame and were being unreasonable, and they wanted special committee meetings and this, a lot of name calling. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for their hearts. I mean, some of the personalities on that side, I'm not crazy about, but I don't have to be. This is not a perfect process because you're dealing with imperfect people. It's an experiment, right? And so this is part of the checks and balance that even under the same umbrella, you want that checks and balance. I mean, look at the AOC faction. I mean, they run roughshod over the Democrat side, and they get their way off the time, and they cause strife, and they go back and forth, and they push people around, and people have criticized them to folding to the left-wing progressives, woke policies and all that, and they've won their party over. So I don't know. I just didn't think this was the end of the world. I thought it was good. I think overall, if it shows that there's a checks and balance in government, and I think the Republican Party modeled it to an extent.
We're going to talk about this in much more length, but
I wasn't supposed to go into that.
No,
analysis?
Absolutely, you were supposed to, but we cannot forget that tomorrow President Biden will finally be visiting the border.
Conveniently.
Now, I just want to know why all of a sudden. Why did he pick El Paso? What's happening? Can you give us a little tiny a piece of information about that?
Well, yeah. He didn't call us, but go ahead, George.
No, George, I don't think there's any rhyme or reason.
He called George.
Yeah, I look forward to talk about it in detail next week, although it'll be a very short discussion. My response to that, I know it doesn't sound like a very good civic lesson, is who cares? I mean, who cares at this point? I mean,
too little, too late.
Right, exactly. What exactly is the point? Seriously, can somebody please? You guys are listening in this morning. If you are, thank you for listening. What exactly is the point? What will be achieved? It'll be a promo op, maybe. I don't know. What will be achieved? Hopefully, it's more successful than his recent speech. Right on.
Well, my question is, if I was interviewing him. Why now? What made it the point? How was it not a problem before? When did it become a problem? When were you notified of that problem? How did they describe that problem to be? What is the solution? How are you going to implement the solution? I mean, do you see where it go? I mean, because an idea is wonderful, but if you can't implement it, then it's just an idea that wasn't implemented, and it sounds great. So I want to know, why is he doing it now? No, I don't know if anybody's going to push back on him and ask why. And then what are you going to do about it? There's people that are speculating because he's going to announce him re-election, so how could he not visit the border? I mean, my understanding, and George or Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first time in 50 years of his career of being in politics that he's visiting the border, and especially the 2 years of being president with the atrocities that are happening down there.
What's going on?
I mean, it's really bad down there, and it's been bad for a while. It's not like it just became bad last week. So he's not Johnny on the spot, and I'd have a lot of questions. If there was anyone that was going to ask him sincere questions and give honest pushback, other than Ducey, but he's never going to get an opportunity to. I mean, I'm just curious. I think this is just a political stuff.
No serious person, in my view. It's interesting. He's the president of the United States. We should talk about it, for 30 seconds. But no serious person thinks that this is going to mean anything at all. This man does not care at all. He is gleeful that what's going on at the border is going on, and I say that with great confidence because we've had systematic report after systematic report for two years now about what's going on down there, about how border towns are just absolutely overrun with illegal aliens, and he doesn't care. Between he and Mayorkas, the exact policies in place that ensure that these individuals pour across the border, and that there's no accountability, and then he facilitates their movement en masse throughout the interior of the United States. And now, after 5 million people, he's going to go down there to do what? They're clearing out El Paso, all the tent cities, right? Excuse me, all the really sort of tent groups down there are going to be. Yeah, right, exactly. So what exactly is he going to see? El Paso before being overrun? Who else gets that privilege? Nobody else. Because after he leaves, the chaos ensues. This is a joke, frankly, and it's rather insulting. If you're a civically minded citizen of the country, this is a very expensive insult.
But this is not just because it's coming from President Biden. I mean, if he would have responded a lot sooner, then we would have supported that and said, hey, great job, do your job. Yeah. I could care the label that he carries. I care about the ideas he's going to implement because they affect us. They affect the citizens. I mean, this is, George and I, and you, I know how you feel. We're not partisan hacks in the sense of that, Republicans or conservatives can do no wrong. Christians can do no wrong. So-and-so are always bad. No, I mean, ideas can come from a variety of places. And if President Biden had great ideas and was implementing them well and was governing and leading well, then I'd give him the credit that he deserves. Romans 13 says, give honor to whom honor is due. And I would give him that honor. This is just, what are you going to do with this? And to George's point, I think this is a big nothing, unfortunately. I wish it was something. Let's see what happens. But the timing is interesting to me.
I can tell you what will happen with great certainty is that he's going to blame Republicans. He's already come out. He's going to blame it, which is just complete. Talk about gaslighting.
I just got
on steroids.
Goosebumps when he said that.
Well, did you hear what he said about the Capitol Police officer, William Evans, who died? They passed away. He said that he died from threats by these sick insurrectionists. He was run over by a Nation of Islam supporter.
Yeah,
by the car.
In April of 2021.
Remember that? I mean, remember that. And talk about lies. I mean, so how do you trust anybody, whether it's President Biden, President Trump, Congressman this, Congresswoman that? It doesn't matter. Anyone that lies is that much is either completely incompetent, and then they need to talk about how to remove this person, or is just a extremely deceptive and dishonest person and shouldn't be in office anyway. But
well said.
That right there is just horrible.
It's truly pathological with this man. And it fits. It actually fits where the Democrat Party is. I think he is an appropriate leader for the Democrat Party. It is all things, no matter what, all day and night, to whatever extreme necessary to obtain power. We keep saying it over and over and over again. If you keep saying that, wow, he's been so ineffective, Nico. I disagree with that. He's been very, very, very effective. The objective is to attain power at, virtually by doing whatever it takes to obtain power. This man's done it. This man has done it.
Well, we kind of gleamed over this, but just think about this seriously. So we have a Capitol Police officer, William Evans, who was murdered, killed by a black Nation of Islam supporter when he was rammed by his car. But during his speech, President Biden says he died as a result of threats by these sick insurrectionists. And we know what he means by insurrectionists. But that's not what happened. I mean, that's not something to just glean over. I mean, you're the president of the United States and you can't handle facts well. Handle the facts. I mean, say A, B, and C if A, B, and C happen, and then give your perspective on A, B, and C. But this is just a lie. Either that or, like I said, he's extremely incompetent and someone needs to remove him.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, when did this so-called insurrection happen? January 6th of what? 2021. When did Bill Evans die?
That I don't know.
April of 21.
Okay.
So I'm trying to understand, was this
that says it all.
Was this a 3-month insurrection? Just trying to understand how.
Well, he's labeling the incident in April to the people, not the incident, to the people, from what I understand. But still, it doesn't matter. It's
moronic.
Inaccurate.
There's no connection between those Trump supporters and Bill Evans, which is your point. I know I'm doubling down on it to say you don't need to be a vast reader to connect the dots here. And I guess what I worry, we always come back to this on the show, we're going to do it again this time, is to the degree you're not critically thinking in America right now, as a citizen of this country.
Dangerous.
You're doing yourself and your family and generations to come of your family great harm. Pay attention. Pay attention.
People that are asking questions about Damar Hamlin and his collapse and the possible connection with the possibility of even discussing, was that event caused by the COVID-19 vax? Those people are getting shut down fast. And so, yes, I understand the critical conversation that we all need to get all the information out. But on this one, I have a lot of questions myself.
Well, they're legitimate questions.
They are.
And there's a lot of data that backs up the concerns that people have. And this is the problem we've been talking about for years on this show now. And just in general, just talking about ask questions. Critical thinking is what? Sparring with ideas in your mind. You know, when you have somebody look how they look on the punching bag, I'm gonna use a fighting analogy, sorry, or speed bag or double end bag. I mean, everybody looks great on mitts or on the heavy bag. You get them in a ring and spar with ideas and see how really good their technique is and how their defense is and their offense, and can they perform under pressure? It's different. Can ideas perform under pressure? Can evidence withhold under pressure? Something called cross-examination. It's one of our constitutional rights. And that every citizen that is accused of an allegation is afforded through their counsel. And so anyone should be able to defend their position if if it's a strong position or they're extremely passionate about it. And people have questions. You have a tremendous amount of athletes, and you guys have probably seen the collection of videos that have been circling out there. And there's data out there. I mean, I don't remember who posted it. It was in passing. I just glimpsed at it. But someone had data, and I have not verified it, so I'm not going to give you specifics. Between 1966 and early 2000s, somebody had said 1,100 people had dropped from all athletics. And then between 2021 and now, the same amount. Why? You just have to, that's a legitimate question, why? This hasn't happened before like that. The question needs to be asked. He's a 24-year-old professional athlete. What happened?
Well, we will have more with Sidebar coming up next on WOAI.
With reputations as respected high-level prosecutors in Bexar County, the attorneys of LaHood Norton Law Group bring invaluable practical knowledge from the other side of the aisle, using over 70 years of combined experience to strategically advocate clients' rights and pursue the best possible outcome.
I'm Nico LaHood with LaHood Norton Law Group. Have you been arrested or accused of a crime? The LaHood Norton Law Group has the knowledge to defend you regardless of how small or large your case. In Bexar County, anywhere in the state, or even nationwide, we have the knowledge to defend you in federal or state court, no matter how small or large your case. We are trial lawyers with proven success.
Using their 70 years of combined experience to strategically advocate for their clients' rights and pursue the best possible outcome. The LaHood Norton Law Group. For a free consultation, call today, 210-797-7700. 210-797-7700. LaHoodNorton.com.
This is Nico LaHood. If you or a loved one has been arrested or accused of a crime, we can help.
LaHoodNorton.com.
1200 WOAI. This is Sidebar. Of course, you can always listen to any podcast that we've done, any show we've done on the iHeartRadio app. We're listed under Sidebar with Nico LaHood. And also, you can go to sidebartv.com and go on any of the platforms that we're now on, thanks to Salo and Dom. I want to start with Kevin McCarthy. It took, I guess, the 15th vote early this morning, I guess, to finally go through after 14 failed ballots of, getting him. They said it's the longest the chamber has gone in trying to get this done. And I heard so many people going, give it up. What is wrong with the Republicans? I don't get it. Why? And at one point I was like, thinking to myself, who else could run so that it could be an easier situation?
Interesting.
That would have, if somebody would have gone along with what the Republicans wanted. But then after, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh time, I started to understand, well, no, this was the first time I saw this group of Republicans that actually stood together. And I was like, I get it now. The big light bulb went on above my head to say, this is the way it's supposed to be. But
it really is.
Talk about that.
It's a deliberative body. Congress, from soup to nuts, it should be. And it should engage in debate. And this idea that our leaders are entitled to ascend to a position is just nonsense. It's totally un-American. The idea that Kevin McCarthy would even expect that. Now, even before any of this started, we knew that there were at least 5 holdouts. And we knew that there was going to be a clear barrier of entry for McCarthy, because it's a razor thin lead, right? I mean, we have 223 seats. The GOP has 223 seats in the House, and so it's a bare majority. You need 218. You've got an extra 5. There's not a whole lot of room there, and he knew going into this that there were 5 holdouts. So this isn't looking pretty to begin with. But we didn't expect come Tuesday is that we were going to have at least 21, from what I could count, at least 21 holdouts, and these were individuals who had very clear idea. I want people listening in, please understand, these individuals knew exactly what their issues with McCarthy was. His thinking, his positions on things, his approach to things. And from the very beginning, they made it very clear that they had a serious trust problem. And so they basically put the nation on notice. We are not going to be okay with the status quo. That's over. And we are going to take advantage of the fact that there's a literally like a paper-thin, razor-thin edge here in terms of the number of seats. We can influence this outcome. There's 21 of us. There's dozens of us. We can influence this. And they did. They didn't want business to go back to status quo. The question is, what were those issues? That's the questions we should be asking ourselves. What issues do they have? What beef do they have? Rather than saying, gosh, this is so chaotic. We got to go back to normal. Let everything just go back to normal. Where's that gotten us? How's normalcy worked out for us here over the last several years? And so I think that what we saw this week was excellent. I think it was very productive. I think it was a gift to conservatism. It is about damn time. That's what these guys are there to do. Nico, they're there to debate things. You keep talking about this on the show, right? We got to debate ideas. And the problem is we've been debating less. There's been a lot of groupthink.
And they're not even there in person.
In Congress. Yep.
I mean,
that's the other problem.
Yeah, I mean, look,
voting by proxy.
I'm always fascinated, but you get several individuals or a group of people to look at the same series of facts, and they all have a different perspective or understanding. I mean, I deal with that for a living when you talk about incidents that happen and you have eyewitnesses, and you can have 5 people that see the same incident, and there's going to be some different perspectives on it. I think it's interesting. And then you have to get to the truth on the matter when you go before a jury. So this is, to me, is similar. I mean, some people think that this means nothing, that nothing's going to happen, that McCarthy's too damaged. Others believe that McCarthy now can blame, I got to answer to these folks, because all these rules have been placed in, so then maybe it can be more effective and he doesn't have to rely on his own. They don't have to trust him, so to speak, because they've
got it down on paper.
They've got him by the shorts. So I don't know. Look, I just love debate. I don't like things to go along to get along. I remember when I went into office, when I first became district attorney, I was meeting with some people that involved in the Bexar County system, and they said, well, this is the way we do things. I was like, well, I don't know. That's the way you do things. I don't know. I'm not there yet. I mean, I just got in. Let me assess the situation. I understand the law. I understand the processes. But please don't tell me that phrase again. This is not the way we do things. I don't know who we are. If you have a mouse in your pocket, that's between you and the mouse. But I'm not part of the we. Let's just see what happens. I'm not going to be I'm not trying to be division. I'm not going to be divisive just to be divisive for the sake of that. But I have to be comfortable with what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So I want to make sure I understand what I'm doing. If that's the nature or the sentiment of these 21 people, then good for them. If they were doing it for different reasons, shame on them. Whatever, doesn't mean we can't benefit from it. I mean, that's between them and the Lord, in my opinion. I wasn't involved in behind-the-scenes discussions. I think it's very telling when you get behind the scenes. And I'm not going to be nitpicky, but I don't know, man. I mean, Matt Gaetz, I saw him when McCarthy was talking. He kind of stood up and he's on his phone texting. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he was texting his mom. And that was the first time. That was the only time he was texting. And I mean, we all text a lot. So I'm not trying to be over. That was a critical time. And McCarthy is the new speaker. There had been tremendous debate. Be engaged. You're on camera, probably, most likely. You've been a vocal voice out of the 21. I look at little things like that. I'm just saying, okay, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being nitpicky. But I think this can be a good thing. I hope it's a good thing. It just depends on McCarthy's going to navigate this. He gave a good speech, but a speech is a speech. I'm into actions, not just speeches.
I think it set a great precedent. I'm with you. I'm cautiously optimistic. Let's see what comes of this. I think it does set an excellent precedent. I think what's tragic is that people think this is not the way it's supposed to be. That this is somehow a deviation from the way this deliberative body is supposed to work. This is exactly how it's supposed to work. And I love that these guys double down on what I thought were critical concessions. I want to note that, think about it here for a moment. The fact that McCarthy resisted and that there was this kind of opposition. And I think shame on Republicans who think that this was problematic, that this was, and there were a lot of false accusations, even from Republicans. I think Dan Crenshaw was over the top,
I was just calling these guys
terrorists.
That's funny, man.
I mean, is he out of his mind?
Dan's
terrorist?
A little weird, man.
Give me a break, Dan. Really? So I think the whole thing was very, very healthy. There were plenty of specifics. We should beat some around in here just so we can understand. What worries me is McCarthy pushing back almost makes me wonder what kind of speaker would he have been if not for these concessions? Answer, he would have been Paul Ryan light. And I think this is what everybody's worried about. Remember, McCarthy wanted to be speaker in 2015, and then Paul Ryan became speaker. So McCarthy's been keeping his eye on that role for a long time. I'm sorry. I think he's better than Paul Ryan in certain things. I think let's use Trump. Trump's sort of the dividing line. Where are you on Trump? That kind of tells you, right? Well, McCarthy was hesitantly supportive of Trump. In many cases, he had to kind of be dragged kicking and screaming across the finish line to support Trump. That's unfortunate. And Republican voters resent that. Regardless of what you think about Trump, he was the president of the United States. He was conservative. His policies were hyper-conservative. They were good for the country. And McCarthy should have been on board, fully supportive. And at any given time, you just didn't know, Karen. I wasn't sure, is he on board? Is he not on board? I mean, so that kind of thing just gets old. They're tired of that. Can we count on the speaker to truly advance conservatism in the country? And I think because of these concessions, we're much closer to that than we would have been.
You bring up Trump, and this is just a tiny little side note topic, but I wanted to ask about when Matt Gaetz nominated Trump, and there was pretty much no response. Was that an indication to you that Trump really is losing? I'll
let Nico weigh in on that because
I brought that up.
I don't want to take Nico's.
Well, no, I thought it was an observation. I thought it was something to observe. Before former President Trump had a stronghold on the Republican Party for a while. Whether you think that's good or bad, okay, that's open for discussion. But I think a lot of people, and Matt Gaetz would even say during interviews, look, I'm going to vote for President Trump. I support him. I like him, but he's wrong on this. I mean, you're seeing this, which I think that's good too. I don't think Trump should control everything. I don't think Obama should have controlled everything, or Clinton or Biden or anybody, AOC. I just think there needs to be I believe wisdom is found, as Proverbs says, in the counsel of many. I believe that. I ran the DA's office that way. It wasn't me, it was we, it wasn't mine, it was ours. I mean, it was always us, and I had counsel. I was the dumbass with the name on the plaque, but I'm just saying. But I had counsel, and I think everyone should be. So I don't know. I think it's something. I don't think that people believe that Trump endorsements are what they used to be. Arguably, other people have different opinions. That's fine. So I don't know. I just think it's interesting that Trump didn't really play a big role in influencing this.
It is interesting. When Nico and I were beating this back and forth, I took the position that Trump's kind of irrelevant to this whole thing. I mean, where's Trump on any of these concessions? Nowhere. In fact, if you look at the concessions, they have to do specifically with bringing the House back into order, getting back to running this House of Representatives like it is intended to be run. It has absolutely nothing to do with Trump. I mean, what does Trump have to do with making sure that the House holds vote on key conservative bills? What does Trump have to do with making sure that they come up with balanced budget amendments? What does Trump have to do with making sure that we get back to we actually have congressional term limits? What does Trump have to do to make sure that they actually hold votes on border security? What does Trump have to do with that? What does Trump have to do to make sure that they actually, every time they put forth spending, that they also put forth spending cuts? What does Trump have to do with launching investigations into the weaponization of the federal government? Trump has nothing to do with this kind of stuff. Now, he's been arguably a victim, a recipient of the bull that isn't addressed by Congress. That's true. But what in the world does Trump have to do with these concessions? Nothing. So that was
arguably Trump puts himself front and center. I mean, you got to take the criticism. Like George and I debated this back and forth. I mean, just a little pushback. Trump takes all the credit when he endorses people and they win. Then you got to take the criticism when you endorse people and they lose. I mean, that's all. I mean, I just think that's fair. Anybody should do that. And so, Trump maybe strategically positions himself as the leader of the party so he can be more influential and not have opposition and all those things. There's strategy behind some of these things, which is fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing per se, whether you like him or not. But I think he puts himself out there. So I think, I think he's got influence.
And there it is.
Thinks he does.
There's the difference here. The difference is where do you establish your standard for determining whether Trump's relevant or not? If the standard is, hey, Trump's out there making a lot of noise, and he insists on having something to say about this, fair enough. You're responding to him. My thinking is, what is it that they're fighting about? What is it that McCarthy is resisting?
That should be discussed.
What exactly is the issue? And so I think what's happening here, I think, is reflective of what we saw in the nation. People are kind of following, which shiny object do you follow? And we follow the sexy one. We follow the one that, that makes noise. We follow the one that pits person against person. Republicans were turning on Republicans over this. This is insane. This is a gift. This is a gift to republicanism. It's a gift to conservatism. But we couldn't get our heads out of our proverbial pie holes, if you know what I mean, to be able to step back and say, wow, this could really work in our favor. Because, Nico, it sets a precedent that, hey, before you guys think about going business as usual, you're going to have opposition. Like, for instance, they lowered the threshold back to what it used to be. It only takes one member, right? One member to propose vacating the chair of the speakership. Mm-hmm. One.
A vote of non-confidence, right?
That's right. So you're going to have debate over that now. I think
that's a good thing, though.
Hold on. On what basis? But there's got to be a basis. It can't just be because you had a bad day.
Well, what's the basis?
The basis is that the speaker, objectively and discernibly, is not following through on something that he specifically committed to following through on. And by the way, they're requiring that this stuff be written down.
I was just going to say, they took
I know. Got the lawyer in the room here, and I know you'd go there. But I think that's fair, Nico.
Yeah.
If there's a speaker who says, wait a minute, this is significant. Let's say we're talking about, again, these 12 appropriation bills, once a month or so, that get rolled into an omnibus bill at the end. And the speaker said, we're not going to do that. And now you've got $1.5 trillion again.
Yeah.
You can raise an objection to that. And now the whole thing comes to a screeching halt. Is that a bad idea? I don't think so.
I really want to continue this because I want to talk about some of the other concessions they were holding out for, before they gave him the vote. So we will continue with this conversation coming up next on Sidebar.
This is News Radio 1200 WOAI, San Antonio, an iHeart radio station.
The Biden administration is sending another round of military assistance to Ukraine. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre made the announcement.
Today, the United States will demonstrate our continued enduring commitment to Ukraine's ability to defend itself with the announcement of over $3 billion in new military assistance to Ukraine.
It includes dozens of Bradley fighting vehicles and other armed personnel carriers. She says the war in Ukraine is at a critical point as Russia continues its invasion. California Republican Kevin McCarthy finally got the votes he needed to become Speaker of the House. It took 15 ballots for McCarthy to secure the majority leadership position. He finally got that early this morning after making concessions to a small group of far-right conservatives. The Mega Millions jackpot now worth over $1 billion after nobody won last night's drawing. 5 tickets matched 5 numbers. They're worth $1 million apiece. But nobody matched all 6 numbers to win the jackpot. The next Mega Millions drawing will be Tuesday night. I'm Brad Siegel.
From the WOAI Traffic Center.
Taking a look at drive times this morning, there are no issues on Highway 90 eastbound where it's under 5 minutes going from Highway 151 over to I-10, and also no issues on I-35 northbound, about a 5-minute drive from Loop 1604, making your way over to FM 1103. If you see any traffic problems, call 210-785-2601. I'm Jason Fossig, News Radio 1200 WOAI.
This report is sponsored by Compassion International.
Drought, war, and rising food prices have doubled the number of families facing malnutrition. You can help. $50 provides a food kit to feed a family for a month. Just text the word radio to 97646.
You've achieved outstanding things in your life. Your home should be your haven. Haven Builders will turn your vision for a luxury home into a reality. After more than a decade helping Fortune 500 companies soar even higher, Haven Builders owner George Araujo has adapted his management expertise and attention to detail to the residential, design, and planning process. Expect a seamless, stress-free process. Expect exceptional quality. Expect to be impressed. Haven Builders, havensa.com.
1200 WOAI, this is Sidebar. So we're going to continue talking about Kevin McCarthy. One of the things that I wanted to ask, yes, I do know one of the concessions that they were talking about was budget and money and spending. And did I also hear them talking about they wanted an investigation into the withdrawal of Afghanistan? Was that one of them, or what were the others?
I think a rules committee, right, George? You go to the specific, but how a vote gets to the floor, the rules committee, things like this to control exactly how business is done and down there. Is that true, George?
Yeah, I think that one of the concessions involved more Freedom Caucus representation on committees, including the powerful Rules Committee. And there's that concession, and then there's another concession which has to do with the ability to offer more amendments on the floor. Those two are related. The Rules Committee essentially determines what is it that you're going to talk about?
Right.
What's a priority here? And what are going to be the rules of engagement? And to have more Freedom Caucus members in there will ensure that, bills that the conservative voter cares about. And Nico and I were debating this. I want you guys, those of you guys who are listening in, I'm seeing names here, by the way. I have an iPad in front of me so I can actually see your names. Janet Gernand and Ray Rodriguez and Mark Faz and Josh Stevens, just to name a few. Thanks for listening, and we really, really appreciate it, and thanks for your comments. What I was thinking is that if you go back and you think about what's happened here over the last 6 months with elections, Nico, and I'd like to get you guys' thoughts on this. I think there is a barn doors difference between the Republican voter across the country, east to west, and our elected officials, unfortunately. And that's ultimately what was playing out here on the House floor, Nico. I think there is unbelievable distrust. This is sad to me that our Republican voters are looking at our officials, and there's virtually no trust. By virtually every objective standard, congressional approval ratings are in the basement. They're in the low teens, perhaps even lower than that now. I saw one that was now 9%. Unbelievable distrust, and that includes Republicans. And so I think that what was happening here through these representatives, and I love it, this is exactly the point. These representatives were taking the American conservative voters' concerns to the House floor. And I'm asking you guys, when do you think the last time was that happened? I believe that this week that American conservative voters actually felt for the first time, Nico, that they were on the House floor. They were no longer invisible. That they believed that they were present. These guys, as it should be, were representing the concerns of the American voter. And they were pushing back on the status quo. And I'm sorry, this is what Kevin McCarthy represents. Now, I think he's JV compared to McConnell. I think he's a huge improvement compared to McConnell. But I'm setting the bar pretty low there with McConnell. So I think that's why this was good. And I think it breathed fresh air. That there's some confidence that true genuine conservative concerns are going to be represented on the House floor. Am I nuts? Maybe.
No,
but
I don't know. I don't think you are. I think this is good. I mean, again, you can question their personalities or their quirkiness or whatever, or their ultimate. And God bless you, Dom. Intention. Did he sneeze?
I don't know
sorry,
what that was.
It sounded like it. But I think overall George is correct. I think so. I think this can be a good thing. I love checks and balances. I think the Democrats, what you've seen, and I know this intricately, at least being involved in politics, you've seen how a very vocal minority in a faction in the Democrat Party has just taken over the Democrat agenda. The agenda of the Democrat Party today, from a national platform perspective, was not the same agenda from just even 10 years ago, 15 for sure. Years ago, it's very, very different. You hear speeches that we've talked about from Bill Clinton, even Hillary back in the day, Obama when he first started running, Biden throughout the 50 years, Schumer, Pelosi, all of them. I mean, Feinstein, Reid, all of them from the old days. And then how they are now, very, very different. What happened? Did they change, or did a faction kind of take over and there weren't checks and balances? Then fear took over, and then of course they start, primarying people that aren't quote unquote Democrat enough. So I like this. I like this healthy debate. Again, I think stress makes you stronger. The right amount of stress, like I said, either physically, emotionally, spiritually. And so I think this can be a good thing. Now, what they do with it is another story. I hope that these Freedom Caucus people don't get petty, because who says that you have to like someone or fully trust someone to work with them? Just makes you should be. I mean, I was in politics, in the highest levels of local government politics. I definitely didn't trust everyone around me, but I knew. And that's where it's, to be shrewd as a snake and innocent as a dove, right? Matthew 10:16. And make sure your intentions are good, but be shrewd. Have good, wise counsel around you. Play it close to the vest. Know how to interact and deal with people you don't like. That's called being a good citizen. You might not like your neighbor. You might not agree with them, but you got to learn to live next to them. Either that or you're going to have anarchy. It's no different in government.
Well,
yeah, I was going to say, if you take all of this pushback, Nico, I think you could, the underlying theme is let's have more debate. Hard to think of a line that LaHood would agree with more, right?
I love
let's have more debate, not less debate. Yeah. I know this is probably radical now in this current day and age. But one of the concession requirements was, can we please have at least 72 hours to review bills before they come to the floor?
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's big.
Can we please? Or are we going to continue to sort of perpetually pull a Nancy Pelosi where I'll read the bill after I vote for it? Whereas Chris Coons on this last ominous bill that said, look, I haven't read the bill that I voted for, but I'm sure it's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, shame on Republicans for falling for that crap.
Responsible, man.
But shame on them. This is my point. They went along to get along. That's business as usual. This is one of the good things. I mean, someone made a comment. What I saw, the little that I saw, I thought Chip Roy seemed to be real reasonable. He was articulate. The interviews that I saw of him, I thought he was articulate. I thought he seemed reasonable. Whether you like his style or not or whatever. I mean, he seemed sincere. Again, I can never get into a man or woman's mind and their true intentions. He seems very sincere about what he's trying to accomplish. I like people. Then you look at someone like Dan Crenshaw, which I've had issues with for a while now, because he gives a good speech. He does a very good interview, but I don't know if he backs it up. It doesn't seem like he backs it up. And this time, he seemed a little bit not. He's usually real poised. He can debate very well. He's used to some pressure, unless you question his Christian faith, like that young lady did that during that interview, and they caught it on video. Or on one interview I saw, he really seemed frustrated, not his normal poised self, because he understands he's on the camera.
And she had every right.
And he got very
she had every right to question what he was saying. The young lady who she was 16-year-old, right?
Yeah.
She challenged him. She said, based on what you're saying, I mean,
you're going back to the question about his faith. Go back.
But I mean, it's a great example though that you're bringing up, because I think it gives you kind of a keyhole view into Crenshaw's psyche. He doesn't like to be challenged.
No.
And Crenshaw he's not a careful thinker. If he is, he hides it well. He's very emotional.
Yeah.
And he's a reactionary. And I think it's unbelievably unimpressive, to say the least. And so
he's articulate. He has some charisma.
But I think, like you say, Nico, all the time, he is all about the soundbite.
Mm-hmm.
And
seems to be.
Yeah, and he tries to act tough. He thinks that throwing the F-bomb around is a replacement for thinking critically and putting out substance. I mean, this guy, I'm sorry. I'm very unimpressed right now, because I'm kind of disappointed with myself a little bit, because I liked him. I liked him when he first came on the scene. I thought I think we need more of this boldness. But I don't know that he's bold. I think and again, I don't care about his military career. He should be honored for that. I'm not going to bring that into this discussion. Nothing to do with this.
Yeah.
I'm talking about what he's contributed to the quality of debate in the House of Representatives. I don't think he's contributed much. Again, he's a reactionary. I think he's kind of a factionalist. He picks a faction, and anybody else on the other side is an idiot or a terrorist, and he throws the F-bomb around like that's a replacement for thinking critically. This guy, I'm sorry, if I didn't know better, I'd say he was pretty empty-headed. I would. He has nothing. He contributes no substance to the discussion. He divides people, it seems to me, and he throws out labels.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like President Biden. That's why I want to transition into him.
How dare we criticize Republicans, right?
Right. Wow. So President Biden says, I think it's really embarrassing that it's taking so much time for this to happen, for McCarthy to get in. But at the same time, split screen, he is talking about, as the last 2 years show, we can do profound things for the country when we work together.
Right.
And that made me think, okay, now he's starting to do the things that he said he was going to do, bring the two parties together, visit the border.
I think Biden's right.
About what?
I think that statement is correct.
But do you believe
we can do profound things for the country.
Yeah, sure.
When
sounds great.
When there's, and I should have inserted blind unity. You can do a lot of damage, and he's right. He's done I think he's, as I said before, he's enormously successful, and he's got a party that lines up. They check their brains in at the gate, and everybody's unified around chaos. And it is amazing how much chaos they've been able to outsource to the country.
I mean, I don't know about they check their brains in at the gate, everybody, but I mean, a lot of them do. I don't know how anybody, and my friends who were Democrat and they voted for President Biden and all those things, I don't know how anybody can support what he's done so far. I just don't. I mean, I really try to divorce myself from emotions. I get passionate, so I have to really work on it sometimes. And just make an objective analysis of the evidence I see before me, like I did when I was the DA and like I do now as a defense attorney. And I don't know how anyone can take anything he says. I mean, how many times has the White House corrected him? I mean, literally the same day after he says something, going back on an interview or this or that, and then they have to direct him and pull him off stage. He's lost. He's this. He says something crazy. He says things that don't even sound. They're mumbling. I just don't know how anybody takes him serious at all. Period. So his criticism of what happened with the speakership debate, to me, is not. It's a non-factor. Now I listen to people like Joy Reid, which is painful to listen to that crazy lady, and or these miserable women on The View. They're just miserable. It's like, gosh, are you happy about anything? But these people and their opinion, it's just so opportunistic. I don't like opportunistic people. If you stand on a principle, that principle should apply to people you support and you don't support. Period. End of story. Or it's not a principle. It's an opportunity. So just say what you are. Don't tell me that you're a principled person.
So will President Harris be, wasn't she the border czar? Will she be with Vice President Biden when they go to the border tomorrow?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know. If it is, it'll be one of the super rare appearances. You know, they rarely trundle her out.
I wonder how long they're going to be there. I mean, is it? I wonder.
My daughter asked me. Yesterday we were driving, and she goes, "What does Vice President Harris do?" I said, "Nothing."
Brilliant, insightful question.
I mean, I thought that was interesting.
You're
she
teaching your daughter to ask insightful questions. Yeah.
Biden called her the president again.
It was a great question. He called her that again?
Oh, yeah.
Tell her that literally only Jesus knows the answer to that question. I don't know.
Well, we got one more segment with Sidebar, so please join us when we come back. We'll be back in just a minute.
With reputations as respected high-level prosecutors in Bexar County, the attorneys of LaHood Norton Law Group bring invaluable practical knowledge from the other side of the aisle, using over 70 years of combined experience to strategically advocate clients' rights and pursue the best possible outcome.
I'm Nico LaHood with LaHood Norton Law Group. Have you been arrested or accused of a crime? The LaHood Norton Law Group has the knowledge to defend you regardless of how small or large your case. In Bexar County, anywhere in the state, or even nationwide, we have the knowledge to defend you in federal or state court, no matter how small or large your case. We are trial lawyers with proven success.
Using their 70 years of combined experience to strategically advocate for their clients' rights and pursue the best possible outcome. The LaHood Norton Law Group. For a free consultation, call today, 210-797-7700. 210-797-7700. LaHoodNorton.com.
This is Nico LaHood. If you or a loved one has been arrested or accused of a crime, we can help.
LaHoodNorton.com.
1200 WOAI. This is Sidebar. Please join us on all platforms by going to sidebartv.com. And remember, we're on Instagram and Facebook, and you'll find them all there, sidebartv.com. And, of course, you can always go and listen to past episodes we've done on the iHeartRadio app under podcast, Sidebar.
Karen, can I take a point of personal privilege to talk about Salo and Dom?
Yes, please.
I mean, really taking the podcast. I mean, obviously that we've been here and people have asked for different platforms because not everybody listens to the radio, and I think people that listen have really, hopefully they've enjoyed the conversations and the information, but to get on the different platforms we're doing, to make it, remember we started doing the Facebook Live after because people were asking for some more time. It was horrible. We're holding things and we could hear things. We're trying to squeeze in like a bunch of sardines. And then Salo and Dom, joined us and have really taken it to another level. So they're here with us in the studio every week.
Both of them.
So I want people to know that.
They've done a great job.
Yeah, we're blessed.
Okay, this is our last segment.
Well, before Facebook Live. But
yes,
we're
before
on Facebook Live now, I think, right?
Yes, we are now, and we will continue for about 30 minutes after the show. So, Damar Hamlin, great news. He's speaking with the team. His breathing tube was removed. He had an update, asked if the team won, wrote it down. That was the first thing he asked. And that is all amazing. Mm-hmm. And thank goodness, I think an athletic trainer.
What does that mean, thank goodness?
Thank goodness.
How do you thank goodness?
I never thank God when I do something so light like that. God.
But because George says it sometimes, and some people say it. I don't know what thank. And I'm asking that sincerely.
Okay.
No, I'm just being honest. I'm sorry. It just caught my attention. I mean, what does thank goodness
when
mean?
I don't mean it, like truly, when I say God bless you, Nico, and I am thinking about it, I say thank God.
Okay.
When I'm like blah blah blah, I say thank goodness.
But what does it mean to thank goodness? How do you thank goodness?
That means
what
that
is goodness?
it's something good that happened. That's the way I'm.
So say thankfully then.
Thankfully.
So thankful. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm just curious. That was a sincere question, by the way. I wasn't being a smartass.
When I think about it, just like you say, when somebody says God bless you or something, when you sneeze and you know that they don't really mean God bless you, it kind of loses.
Well, most people
what
say
I believe.
bless you.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Right.
I say God bless.
I take into consideration. So
okay.
thank
Sorry for the
God.
distraction. Well, he's doing well. Look, there's a lot of questions people have. We've had a lot of debate about this. I've listened to a lot of debate. I think it's interesting. I love to hear people. A lot of people are asking questions, as they should be. There's a lot of questions to ask. You have a healthy 24-year-old. George and I were talking, and could it have been the hit? Could it have been the pads? Could it have been this? Sure, all that needs to be on the table. But the fact remains that he's not the only one that has had something happen that's supposed to be quote-unquote healthy. And it's not being reported. So you just have to ask yourself, okay, what's the intervening cause? If we're going to look objectively at evidence and say, okay, well, that gunshot or that stab wound didn't happen on its own. It was either self-inflicted or someone did it and they used an instrument. What is it? So you have to put piece things together. On this type of situation, you have a collapse, you have a cardiac arrest. Interesting. You have a lot of people, young people that are passing away. A friend of ours texted us that I think there was a coach in Divine that passed away recently, 35-year-old. This morning or something like this.
He texted us this morning.
Yeah, and he inferred, you're not on, there you are now, George.
There I am.
Sorry about that.
He inferred that there may have been connection to something else. All I'm saying is, I look, we have to start with the hypothesis on all facts, on all incidents, and then follow the evidence wherever it leads us. We have to shelf our emotions. We have to shelf our own personal agendas, and we all have an agenda, whether it's sincere or not or genuine. It's another story. And then follow evidence, and then say, okay, here's where the evidence led us, the objective evidence. And that's what people should do in this situation.
Well, it is a fact. I believe it's a fact. I don't know what source it is, but that 95% of NFL players are vaccinated. Mm-hmm. So, and it's also a fact that they have not released his vaccination status.
Well, 90-something%, like you said, are vaccinated.
Yeah, but they haven't said, oh, well, Hamlin, yes, he's vaccinated. And that to me raised red flags.
Can we break this up into two discussions for the time we have left, and we can continue on Facebook Live after? I think there's number one, the question about the shot and its effect and how effective it is or ineffective, and whether it's dangerous or not, and could it have been a potential cause of this incident? That's number one. Number two, the issue of prayer. I thought it was beautiful to see the teammates get in the. I sent this to you guys. There was an ESPN host, because it was sent to me. I don't watch stuff. That he just said, "Look, I'm whether I'm supposed to or not." And then the other host said, "Yes, you are." I go, "I'm just going to pray." He prayed on live national. It was a great prayer, by the way. I thought he did a great job with the prayer. Both hosts, the female and the male, were praying along with him, and they were very appreciative of it. I thought it was very appropriate. Other people of influence have said, look, prayer works. I mean, we should pray and come to the Lord very humbly. I thought it was good.
People took a knee to pray on the field.
Oh, good job, Saulo. Yep, people took a knee. I read one comment that someone said it was eerily silent in that stadium. And fans started praying in the stands. Some were praying the Our Father because they didn't know, and others were praying. I just thought, I got chills when I think about things like that. There's power in prayer. The people that criticize that are the same people, and I say this respectfully, but I'm really trying to push back on ideas, right? Are the same people that say, send in good vibes and thoughts to you. Now, how the hell do you send vibes? What are vibes? What are your vibes? Why the hell do your thoughts matter? Who the hell do you think your thoughts matter? And why would your thoughts affect me and help me? How are your thoughts so powerful they're going to help me? And unless you're sending your thoughts to something transcendent outside of us that may or may not have an influence over the situation.
Good vibes.
So, think about them. And I'm really not trying to be snarky or sarcastic.
I get it.
I'm asking a sincere question in a way that's going to push back the way that people push back on me saying, may I pray for you? Who are you? What are your vibes? And what are your thoughts? So I'm thinking, I want you to get better. Wow, so you have the power to get me better by your thoughts? That's interesting. I think that's fascinating. I want to learn how to do it. So there's power in prayer. And the mind is powerful. As a man thinks, so he is. You put your mind to something, and for us as Christians and believers, we're given a petition. We're making a petition, a plea to a sovereign, that as a transcendent sovereign God outside of time, space, and matter, that if it's his will influence the situation, but can always use every situation, whether he answers prayers the way we want him to or not. That's where trust comes in and walking by faith. So.
Yeah, and I'm going to go a little step further, because I know this is what Nico meant anyway, but I'm going to elaborate on it, because I think it kind of played out a little bit this week with Damar Hamlin. There's actually no power in prayer whatsoever. It depends on the object of your prayer.
Yes.
So I can pray to this bottle.
Yep. Yes.
And I'm going to say, I'm going to send my thoughts and prayers for your recovery to this Fiji bottle.
Yep.
It's
You're right.
It's a great bottle. And so maybe you'll get well. That's nonsense. So it depends on the object of your prayer. And I think what you see is that it's okay for people to say spiritual things, like I'm going to send thoughts and prayers, as long as they're unclear about the object of that prayer. Now, I'm a Christian. The Bible says in Acts 4:12 that there is no name under which men can be saved than the name of Jesus Christ. There's no name under heaven by which men can be saved than the name of Jesus Christ. So salvation is only through Christ. So when I pray to the Lord Jesus Christ, who is my Lord and Savior. I'm particular about that. Now, the second I make that statement, depending on your religious persuasion, your temperature may go way up.
Yeah.
Or you may receive that and say, wow, thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And so if your temperature goes way up, and some of you who are listening, it might be going up right now. Why is that? Because the name of Jesus, just like the name of Allah, right? Or Brahman, if you're a Hindu, if you're a Buddhist, you're by definition an atheist, because that was really the sort of the major distinction between Buddhism and Hinduism, is that there's really no God, if you will, or gods. You may feel uncomfortable with that, because the name of Jesus means particular things.
Yes.
It means certain things. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, that there's no way to salvation but by me. And so it forces a discussion. Yeah. And we are becoming increasingly anti-religious in this country. We're becoming increasingly, then commensurately, less comfortable talking about those things. In fact, we're more hostile when we have these conversations as a nation, which is terribly unfortunate, considering that religious conscience is protected, and the freedom to express myself religiously in the public square is protected in the First Amendment. Interesting, isn't it? So I think what happened this week is it kind of brought people back to the notion that there are no atheists in foxholes. This man is suffering. He needs help, and we are powerless. The great National Football League, between all of those athletes on the field, how much money, Salo, do you think we could see probably find in bank accounts? That money didn't mean jack in that moment. We were completely powerless, really. It didn't matter who you were. So what I loved is that this nation kind of came together. There were millions of people watching. Yeah. And whether people admit it or not, they came together to admit that there was only hope in God. They weren't kneeling, Nico, for an aerobic session. No. They were kneeling in prayer to God. And I think that's a very important reminder. We owe Damar Hamlin a huge debt.
What's the phrase?
Of gratitude.
We stand for the flag and we kneel to God, right? I mean, that's it. And so we humble ourselves before that. I thought that was that's a very good point. I mean, people don't realize when you look at history, how many times we had national days of prayer and national days of fasting invoked by governors, invoked by presidents of the United States. It's in the 1400s. I mean, it's more than people think it is. I'm not going to get a number because then someone will fact check me, but it's a crap ton. And that's just a fact. I mean, because this is a country that believes that we have certain rights, inalienable, meaning you can't separate them from us. And they weren't given to us by government. They weren't given to us by a king. They're given us by the King of Kings, right, Jesus, but they weren't given to us by an earthly king. They were given us by our Creator, endowed to us by something outside of time, space, and matter. So government didn't give them, so government can't take them away. So we're acknowledging something greater than ourselves. I love that. And that's the experiment of the United States, united under what? In God we trust. Now, that's a phrase that ended up in our coins and our money in the 1950s, but it didn't start in 1949. I mean, this is a sentiment that we held from the inception of this country.
But always a national reminder. When you start sort of embedding those things in your coin, in your currency, Nico, I mean, what more powerful is there, symbol is there than currency? Yeah. And then to literally sort of subject even that currency to the acknowledgement that God exists, That's a statement as a nation. That's powerful. And I think we kind of saw that. It wasn't money this time, but we kind of saw that happening this week.
Well, the currency was health, right? I mean,
right, but it didn't matter what your title was. It didn't matter how much money you made.
That's right.
It didn't matter what your background was. It did not matter. What mattered is we're powerless and we need God's help, and so we're going to go to him. And I couldn't care less what the ACLU thinks.
Yeah, well,
that's basically what happened this week.
That's right.
I love it.
And let me tell you, and neither did anybody else, by the way.
That's right.
And so nobody's objecting to the fact that all the players were kneeling and praying, by the way. And I promise you, DeMar's family wasn't either. So all that set aside. But I think we do, and we may have to do this on Facebook Live. I wish we did it on the radio. We have to talk about some of the evidence and have that debate that you wanted to have, Karen, or that discussion, not even a debate, just kind of ask critical thinking questions on the shot and what's the evidence behind it and what other factors do we know and what does the studies show? Because, I mean, we have a lot more information now than we did 2 years ago, right, George, when we first started talking about this. And I think we should have a discussion like that, Karen. I mean,
we are wrapping it up.
There you go, Karen. It goes too quick.
I know.
Kurt wants to shut us off. Guys, thanks for joining us this week. Happy New Year. I think this is the first one since New Year, right? Happy New Year. Have a blessed New Year to you and your family. If you want to continue to join us on Facebook Live, we're on Facebook Live now, but we're going to continue for another 30 minutes or so on Facebook Live. God bless you guys. Have a great week.
Even talked about what we're talking about.
I thought we were going to get into this, get our thoughts on what happened with DeMar.
Okay, yes. Okay.
Kind of elaborate that on a little bit.
The night that it happened.
Spent about 25 minutes on that?
Yes. And we're on right. Okay, the night that it happened, we're all talking. The next day, texting, saying, okay, here's another one. How can this not have something to do with the COVID vaccine? Because we are seeing this way too much. And I see both sides of that. People do drop dead every day, and we are hyper aware of it now because we think that, or we have been led to believe that there is something in that vaccine that has caused heart problems, especially for young men.
But that's not our belief. That's the data.
Those are
shows
facts.
That. Yeah, that's the data. Blood
Right.
clots, myocarditis. I mean, those are facts, and in young people as well.
But when somebody drops over or keels over, that's the first thing I think without even reading into it.
I think it too, but I always pause. And to George's point too, him as a scientist, myself as a trial lawyer, I mean, yes, we have our inclinations, we have our hunches, but we have to pause until we can get some conclusory facts and, conclusion on what happened exactly. But we're just seeing this way too much. I mean, I don't know if people that are watching has seen different collections of videos that have been circulating of people just dropping. I mean, dropping the same way he did. I mean, just boom, dead weight dropping. Football players, soccer players.
That woman comedian was talking about it. Bam. Yes.
I mean, she was making a joke about it
Yeah.
there. And then that happened too. And so a lot of people, then there was something circulated, and I have not confirmed this, so I'm going to be very careful with this. I guess there was a bunch of Canadian doctors that passed away. And right, I mean, after the fourth shot, or again, that's what's being reported. All I'm saying is if these are verifiable, objective facts, and this is data, how do you not look into these things? How does right away people say, and these conspiracy theorists, wait a minute, hold on. There's a lot of things that were brushed off as nut job conspiracy theorists, like things like this virus wasn't from China, it wasn't from a lab, you guys are idiots.
The
Censorship.
misinformation.
Right.
Yes.
Ivermectin, what are you talking about? Hydroxychloroquine? Well, the shot will make sure you don't pass it along. The shot will mean you won't get it. Well, all that stuff was wrong. I mean, in the sense of whichever the criticism of it. And then you got censored for it. And nobody was ever corrected. Nobody was ever held accountable for them being wrong. The fact checkers weren't fired, and they should have been. It's unfortunate. When people said, I think Twitter and Facebook are trying to influence and censor people that have different opinions. You guys are nut jobs, whatever it is. Well, they were right. I mean, so all I'm saying is people have questions, and people can figure these things out when you have that thing called debate, when you can have the freedom to express your thoughts through your words. Of course, I understand it's not unfettered. I mean, yes, you can't yell fire in a movie theater. I get all that stuff. I get it. Trust me. But what I'm saying is we still need to be able to talk about it. You need to share. Share a stupid idea. Share a good idea. If your idea is so good, the stupid idea will fall to the wayside. And that's the way this experiment works. And that's not what's happening. And there's a lot of data, George, and you've shared that with us in the past over the years, especially of what the studies, the true studies, what the study was initially to support this behavior. And by the way, let me tell you something else, Karen, and this has to be in your analysis. And if it's not, then I think that you really have to question yourself why. In the first 10 or 11 months of this
after the vaccine,
of the rollout of that, and it was reported on different news platforms, including CNN, there were 9 new billionaires with a B in the pharma industry. Now, that it's not easy to become a billionaire. It's hard enough to become a millionaire, but a billionaire and 9 of them within 10 months. Now, how is that not part of? I look at motives for a living. I'm sorry, I do. That's what I do. You have to. Well, why would somebody do what they do? There has to be a motive or a purpose. That's got to be part of the discussion. That's all I'm saying.
I think if you're following what's been happening with the COVID vaccination program, and you're paying attention to certainly this show or discussions like the ones we had in this show, where we've looked at things like VAERS and safety signals and what medical professionals have been saying about increasing rates of vaccine-induced myocarditis, you know that there's a clear increase in the number of cases relative to what we should be seeing. And so what I've tried to look at is studies generated here in the United States. I'm talking about peer-reviewed studies that are done by typically university research groups here in the United States and overseas, and we're kind of seeing this convergence of data that shows, and it's getting more and more in your face, sort of incontrovertible, that there's a decided continuing spike in a number of vaccine-induced myocardial. When I say vaccine-induced myocardial deaths, what I'm talking about is just as it sounds, that within a proximal period of time after the first dose and or the second dose, that people are experiencing myocardial infarction as a result of the swelling of the heart. And there's just hundreds of peer-reviewed studies that show a clear connection between the spike protein, which is in the mRNA vaccines. You guys have probably heard a lot about the spike protein, which is the primary means by which the virus is transmitted to a host cell. And it looks just like a spike. And at the very tip, there is a crown-looking structure, which is called a corona, the crown. And that particular spike protein has an affinity not just for lung tissue, but for cardiac tissue. There's an ACE2 receptor that it combines with. You can look all this stuff up, ACE2, which it combines with on cardiovascular cells, on cardiac cells. And what's happening is that is leading to substantial cardiac problems. And we don't totally understand the exact mechanism right now. That's the subject of a lot of study. But there's no question that there's a clear connection. The question, though, ultimately is, how serious is this? Is this statistically insignificant or not? And I can answer that question. It is no longer statistically insignificant. It is statistically significant. And we've seen a lot. I mean, there's hundreds of athletes that, as Nico said, are literally dropping on the field. And the only thing that has changed, this is highly irregular among competitive athletes. Karen, you brought up this week in our texting stream that these individuals are screened for typical causes of primary cardiac. They are. They're substantially,
they're the money makers.
Significantly screened for this kind of stuff. So the typical causes of primary cardiac arrest are ruled out. And so what's going on here? And this is a clear spike. It's a clear departure from the norm. Here's my concern. There seems to be very little intellectual curiosity by healthcare institutions. Very little intellectual curiosity by the CDC.
Question. Yes.
And this is what people are reacting to. And in the aftermath of the Daimler-Hamlin collapse, you saw that the typical individuals hit the Twitter sphere to call anybody who had legitimate concerns, because virtually everyone is vaccinated. mRNA vaccinated in the NFL. There's no question about that. At least 95%. That's correct. And so it's legitimate when you know that there's a growing public incidence of vaccine-induced myocarditis. This guy drops, right? And there's tens and tens of millions of people watching. You can't hide this anymore. You can't run from it anymore. That's the significance of this event. But people were called. People who had legitimate concerns are called vile. They're called conspiracy theorists. They're called anti-vaxxers. Give me a break, man. The data is overwhelming, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. You can't just blow it off. We ought to be talking more about it. We ought to be talking about the studies that are coming out. There ought to be curiosity at the CDC. There ought to be investigations. And it's crickets. How many more people have to collapse before we take this seriously?
The thing that a lot of people that I was around, at least, seem to have gotten COVID over the break, over the Christmas break.
A lot of people.
And I was at a place where I eat, and one of the employees working there, I said, "How was your Christmas break?" And she said, "Oh, terrible. My great grandpa passed away. My other grandpa got COVID. My other family got COVID. I got COVID." I was like, "Oh wow." So I thought I just had sinuses. To be honest with you, it was nothing. But then we have other friends of ours, George and I, in one of our Bible studies, who got strep throat, and it killed him. I mean, it was just, people forget that the flu sucks.
Yeah.
Strep throat sucks. COVID wasn't the end-all, be-all. I mean, we're doing all these things that are putting a lot of people at risk for what? The data was pretty clear from the beginning. The people that were passing away had at least three. It was started from 2 to 3 to now 4 comorbidity conditions previous. Obesity being the most severe one. Believe it or not, vitamin D deficiency was another thing to consider. Stress, whatever, and all these things, heart conditions, diabetes, former cancer, things that had a lower and compromised immune system. But people that didn't, it was an extremely low death rate, extremely low. And then with children, it was almost non-existent, right? And then we start doing this experiments and doing this procedure, this medical intervention, and then telling people that they don't have a choice. And you have that former Jaguars player that I think Salo and I thought it was Salo, somebody was talking to me about it, 38-year-old, very critical, it was maybe George. It was very critical. He was like, people that don't take the vaccine, and we should start mandating it, and they should be jailed and accused. Now, I'm not saying this to be critical. He passed away, by the way, this guy. This 38-year-old
I remember seeing
former
that, yeah.
professional athlete that was militant. I mean, communistic about his ideas with this vaccine and ridiculing and condescending to people and very insulting. And then he passed away, and he was quadruple vaxxed or triple vaxxed or whatever it was. I'm not saying I don't delight in that. It's sad. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is dangerous. Ignorance plus fear plus an agenda is catastrophic.
But you can't ignore what's happening
That's
to
my
a
point.
lot of
You
people.
can't ignore this. Thank you for
Yes.
the long way to get there. You can't ignore this, number one. And number two, what's really the threat? I mean, I guess my point being is people that are getting the very, very reduced form of COVID that's out there now, the strand. Because we have
Totally legitimate questions.
Right. I'm just asking questions, George. I'm just saying.
We have a couple of questions.
Go ahead,
like one, and I want the answer to this. Ray and I think Roger asked, can the effects of getting the COVID-19 vax be reversed? Is there any way to go back in time and say, okay, now I'm going to fix what it did to me? How can it be fixed?
Yeah, I think it's a little too early in the game to be able to answer that clinically. I think there's people who are talking about supplements and girding up with
Dr.
various,
Bittard talks about it a lot.
Various supplement combinations. I think there's probably some truth to that. But if the gold standard is truly a randomized, placebo-controlled study in a clinically controlled environment, well, there's nothing right now to be able to answer that question in the affirmative. But let's pray that we continue. Again, you got to really understand the extent of the problem before you start figuring out how you're going to fix it. Right. And my frustration is that we're not spending enough time on that. But on your, I just want to cite here, this to the point that this is all very legit. This kind of conversation needs to be had more. I'm going back to a 2016 study that indicated, it was just United States here, that calculated that non-athletes are around 29 times more likely to die of sudden cardiac events. 29 times to die, more likely so than compared to an athlete. And we've seen those numbers now just be totally rattled by what's going on. It's typically around 100 to 150 deaths in athletes that are expected every year in the United States. We've blown apart that number. The latest study that I'm aware of is a study done recently that looked at, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, Panagis, you guys can quote me on this, I think. Panagis Polycretis, P-A-N-A-G-I-S is his first name, and Polycretis is P-O-L-Y-K-R-E-T-I-S. He and his research group, he wrote a peer-reviewed letter, and he's a structural biologist. And he looked at data from 2021 to 2022, and he found that there have been 1,616 cardiac arrests or other major medical issues in vaccinated athletes. And 279 of those were mortalities, and they happened in the United States. So what's the significance of this? Well, if the standard baseline is around 100 to 150, and we're at 279 in 2021 to 2022 alone, why is that not worth substantial investigation, significant investigation? That is a very, very good study. It is well done, and it is one of many. So if the baseline's around 100 to 150 and we're clocking in close to 300 now, why? I mean, seriously?
To me, I just analyze, okay, what is the problem? What is the solution?
Why won't they talk about it?
Is the solution been verified?
No, they talk around it.
Yeah, what's the safety profile? People don't understand. We talked about the 4-phase, the blind placebo studies here before and what it is, and first in animal and first in kind and first in man and safety studies and post-marketing studies and things like that to track a medicine, to track something, to make sure that there's a safety profile that we can trust. I mean, the thing that really really took me over the edge was when people even started to, and now we've implemented giving children this shot. I just think that's, and I'm going to say it, I don't give a shit if people like it or not.
Aren't doing very
I mean,
much.
that's
Thank you.
extremely irresponsible. Please pray and think and ask questions. When you look at the cohort of individuals that are at risk, it's not children, unless a child, of course, has some type of born with an autoimmune disease or something. That's different. But then you have to ask, is this the proper thing to do for them? Whether they have it or not, say this kid is more compromised. Fair enough. But is this the proper procedure, or should we do something else? Whether it's quarantine the child, do something else, supplementation, build up their immune system some other way, instead of doing this experiment. This is an experiment. People have mentioned Dr. McCullough, Dr. Corey, Dr. Malone. There's a lot of people out there talking about this. Someone asked, I think Ray asked, what do you do about this? Look, you want to build up your immune system for sure. From what I understand, I'm not giving medical advice. I'm not a doctor. Dr. Buttar talks about this, Rashid Buttar, a lot of other doctors. There's a lot of these speakers, people that have been censored. You have people like Dale Bigtree that have been censored, and they've had to start and kind of work. They've taken off of YouTube, taken off of Instagram, and they were not wrong. So are they going to be reinstated? Are these people that were taken off of these platforms going to be reinstated just because they're trying to inform people? It's not. Were people dangerous? Because I mentioned it earlier, and a friend just sent it to me. It was verified. I mean, I knew it was true, but a coach, 35 years old in Divine Middle School, collapsed in class, had a heart attack. I don't know. I mean, didn't look obese. Doesn't mean that he didn't have heart problems. I don't know if he was born with heart problems. I don't know what the situation is. I haven't read the whole thing and what his medical history shows. But that's not normal. How many 35-year-old coaches drop in class? I don't know. I haven't heard of it before in my 50 years. So all I'm saying is we should look into it.
In the general population, I think it's a harder discussion to have, to Nico's point. But I think when you're looking at vaccinated professional athletes or vaccinated full-time athletes, I think then the calculus changes significantly. It is a very, very rare event. 50% of the vaccinated athletes that actually, or 50% of athletes that actually die of cardiac arrest, die from something that actually is very difficult to detect. Because you were talking about these guys are screened for everything.
Yeah.
Well, there are some things you can't screen for. They're difficult. They're genetically oriented. A hypertrophic myocardium. I'm trying to remember what the heck is that. It's a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Is the reason for at least 50% of deaths in athletes, and that is a result of the sort of the thickening of the cardiac wall. It's tough to find that or to screen that, really, unless you do something a little more interventional. And so, but what we're seeing, does it really match that in Damar Hamlin's case? Or was it? What were we talking about when we were originally texting about this, Nico? We were talking about the possibility of a cardiac contusion. I said, I wonder if it could be a cardiac contusion. I didn't rush to the vaccine. You know that. We were going back and forth. There was another dear friend of ours who happens to know a lot about football and who also happens to be a physical therapist, a dear friend, and I really respect his opinion on this. He's inclined very strongly from the get-go towards vaccine-induced myopathy. But I've been kind of slow on this. Could it be a cardiac contusion? But to be fair, this wasn't an impressive tackle, was it? I'm no football expert.
No.
Pretty routine
Anybody
tackle.
that watched it said,
There's a lot of protection on the breastbone there. And if it was a cardiac contusion, you'd actually have the rupture, structural rupture of the heart. I don't think Hamlin
gets slammed on their back, suplexes. I mean, things like this.
Without pads.
I mean, even just professional wrestlers, and just spoiler alert, professional wrestling's fake. But even though it's fake, it's still hard on the body.
Not so
they fall all over the place. I mean, so you just think to yourself, why aren't we seeing this more? That's all I'm saying. I mean, it's a valid question.
The predominant opinion was commotio cordis. That was the predominant sort of armchair Twitter medic, and that's what happens when you have a disruption of the rhythm of the heart. Cardiac contusion is when you actually have a rupture of the structure of the heart. Commotio cordis is when you rupture the rhythm of the heart, basically, inducing, I think, a condition called ventricular tachycardia. And so this was
pretty rare.
This is it is unbelievably rare. Maybe 10 to 20 people.
Yeah.
So is there any indication that Damar Hamlin Well, this is part of the problem. We don't know. Yeah. This is all very hush-hush. This is
nobody wants to know.
This is a public health concern.
Sure it is.
We know that the majority of people in the NFL have been vaccinated. We know what the safety signals are now with regard to myocarditis. We know that it's affecting the age group of maybe 16 to 39,
yep,
I think.
That's exactly right.
Okay, he's 24 years old. It's totally reasonable. And the idea that people are being sort of blown off, ignored, and that the CDC and other health organizations are leading the way, this is unconscionable.
Somebody brought up on Facebook, James, he said, I hope this wakes a lot of people up now that it's not just like a local high school athlete having this happen to them. And I get that, but it makes me think, just when the vax first came out, and even my daughters had 2 male friends, they were seniors in high school, that suddenly had heart problems. Had to go to the doctor, heart problems, taking medicine for it.
That's
George, it's like, it makes me
young
cry.
People, it does, man. It breaks my heart.
But is there any way like that you can take, an MRI and an X-ray or something that would lead a parent to say, okay, now that we know that you have this, you're not going to do football? I mean, how do you even know unless something happens?
Well, no, that's it. That's the problem.
People that have followed me at all know my wife and I's opinion. We believe our son Michael is vaccine injured. I've said that when I was DA. I took a lot of shit for it. I don't care. My wife and I made a conscious decision. We're going to speak the truth, not our truth, just objective truth. Excuse me, in our opinion. Michael wasn't born that way. People have questions about, okay, do you have MTFHR? What kind of gene do you have that maybe makes you more susceptible to certain things? Why does this kid get it and that kid doesn't get it? All I know is we have no history of autism or spectrum of autism in our family at all. And Michael wasn't born that way. And then up until 16 months to 18 months after that big round of vaccines, Michael was very different. And so we have the video, we have the pictures, and we have the testimony to talk about it. And now we live with a child on the spectrum of autism. And he's a delight. He's a joy. I'm glad God chose us to raise him. He teaches me lessons every day and teaches the rest of our children lessons every day. And I'm honored to be his daddy. So I've had questions about, and our last 2 children are not vaccinated. Maya was vaccinated, our oldest, till 3 years old. She's 14, hasn't had one since. And they're, by God's grace, very, very healthy. And they don't get sick the way other kids get sick that are filled with vaccines. Okay, that's just us. That's our testimony. We can be a little mini study because we have 2 kids that are vaccinated to a certain point and 2 kids that have 0 vaccines, and now none of them do, and we can track that. We can be part of that kind of study. So I was always leery from day one, and I've been very vocal about that, but I think I'm very logical about it. I'm not emotional about it. I'm passionate. There's a difference. I'm not emotional. I'm passionate. And I'll follow the evidence. I've made very tough decisions based off logic and evidence in the justice system and for our family's decisions. And so I was always very leery, but this shot is even different than normal vaccines. This is a gene therapy. This is an mRNA. George in past shows, because of his work with pharma and as a chemist and working for Merck, was it Merck, right? Merck and different companies. You've worked for a couple of them. But he's actually a chemist by trade. I mean, he's really given us tutorials in the past about what mRNA versus what biologics is, because that's what normal vaccines. Flu vaccine is considered a biologic because it doesn't go through the phase 4 studies, and it doesn't have the same safety profile because they had to circumvent that, and we've talked about this on past shows. And so that's called a biologic. But even those are different than these. We talked about the 2-month study. We talked about what was really safety about. So this is something completely different. I know people that still vaccinate under the normal schedule but don't want this one. And then they make a distinction between, I'm giving you that background just to make that, I'm really trying to be very specific with my words. And so this is something very different, Karen. And it's very, I think it's gotten to a point to be dangerous to where we need to ask legitimate questions. And someone made a comment, we got to get to a point where we can, it's not afraid to ask. Absolutely. And that's why I will always stand.
Then you practice that.
Next to someone like Bill Maher. Yes, George, talk about practicing it in a second, please. Because Bill Maher is a rabid defender of free speech. He just is. I mean, and I disagree with him on 90% of his positions, probably maybe 95, I don't know. But on the ones that I agree with him on, I really agree with him on. Like, he can't stand censorship. He's not like a super woke. He believes that men and women are different and all that. So, but he's for free speech, and that's where I'm always. And he invites debate, and he models debate. And he models professional, snarky, of course, he's a comedian, debate, sarcastic, but it's not disrespectful. And that I will always stand with him.
That credit is due. It is. That credit is due Bill Maher. Good for him, and I hope he continues to do that. Karen, I'm always hesitant to give medical advice. I can give clinical advice, but not medical advice. There's a difference. I'm not going to be prescribing anything, but I can tell you clinically that I was just trying to think of all the studies that I've read, they're all clinical examples. So domestic and international studies that have been done on vaccine induced myocarditis are clinical myocarditis. In other words, persons with symptoms, something actually happens and now they have symptoms. And what they do is they do a simple blood test and they measure the concentration of troponin, which is a protein, and it's a protein that you'll find in heart tissue. It's not normally found in the blood. It's nothing normal. But they found that in significant number of persons that when you have an event and you're tested, you'll see this protein in your blood. Now, here's the good news and the bad news. The good news and bad news is that that there are examples of subclinical troponin levels, meaning before you actually have an event. If you have your blood checked, and this is problematic. You'll get a vaccine, and they've done that. People will get the first vaccine, they'll get the second one, never mind the boosters, but they'll get the first and the second one, and they'll have the blood checked, and they'll find higher than level concentrations of troponin. And so it seems to me that you don't need a PhD to figure out that the likelihood of a cardiac event goes up. We don't know yet how much, but the fact that there's this association of that kind of concentration of troponin in the bloodstream and the likelihood of a cardiac event, it's something people, if you have an athlete in your family and they're serious about pursuing a life in athleticism, and they've been vaccinated, I think it's appropriate to do that.
Not just you're talking about the COVID one, not just any vaccine.
Yeah, I'm particularly focusing. Correct. Thank you. If you've had
what is that term that you use so that people will know what to ask for if they get their child's blood tested?
Yeah, troponin is a protein, and it's a protein typically found in heart muscle, and it's again not normal for it to be in the blood. Certainly not at the levels that we've seen. I'm simply bringing this up because there have been enough instances of subclinical troponin levels. Again, before those symptomatic, unfortunate events, that you can kind of look into and maybe be proactive about. I wouldn't necessarily recommend everybody go do that, but if you have an athlete in your family and they've been vaccinated with mRNA vax, and I'm sorry, I gotta say I gotta throw Pfizer under the bus here because they deserve it. Pfizer has done an unbelievable amount of damage as a corporation. It is stunning to me, stunning to me, and we should talk in here, Nico, at some point. What can people do? Because these guys are shielded from liability.
Yeah, they are.
But I want to be very clear that
people don't know that.
Neither the 1986 Vaccine Injury Act nor the PrEP Act, which is the act under which mRNA vaccines would fall under. None of them will protect a vaccine manufacturer in the event of willful misconduct. And I'm telling you right now, based on the things that have been coming out, I would not be surprised if we clear that hurdle, Nico.
Yeah, it's as of 80,
how hard is it to prove in court is a question for you.
It depends. If it's a civil case, it's going to be preponderance of the evidence.
Because they're not shielded from that.
Well, we are right. But look, people don't realize that there's a vaccine injury compensation fund that was passed after the bill passed in 1986.
That's right.
And when you look at childhood ailments, but pre-1986,
and there's one for the PrEP Act too for mRNA vaccines.
Absolutely. And then 1989 is considered the gateway year because that's the gateway year is the year, ironically, 3 years after this heavy vaccine schedule was implemented into children, where kids, think about it, kids are sick. Kids are sick. People always ask, people say this to me all the time as a daddy of a child on the spectrum. Well, we're just identifying autism better. We're just, you don't miss autism, Karen. Yeah. The first time most people heard of autism or the autism spectrum disorder was Rain Man in the 1980s.
Right.
He's an autistic savant. So his mind works completely different, but you saw his stemming. He would stem, he'd have sensory overloads, and he would have meltdowns. and all that stuff, flapping and things this day, and he'd repeat himself over and over again. He was very meticulous and would do this, and that was it. But autism was argued, it depends on the study you look at, was somewhere between 1 in 5,000 to 1 to 10,000. Some people use that previous to 1989. And now it's 1 in 34, roughly. I'm going to give you a rough number. That's insane.
Yeah.
And they say, well, I go, well, guess what? And I was DA in this county, as you know, right? And so I've been to most crevices of this county. And it's a big ass damn county. There's not a secret autism village somewhere. You know why you don't see 50-year-old people on the spectrum? Because they're 1 in 10,000. You see 1 in 10,000. George's brother-in-law is on the spectrum of autism, and his mother-in-law swears it was after the vaccine. I'll let George tell that story.
That's correct.
I mean, now it's 1 in 34. So all I'm saying is, what's the intervening cause? And the causal, correlation is not causation. Yeah, but correlation means investigation. And in this world, it doesn't. So all I'm saying is we should be able to have this conversation. I'm not crazy. I'm crazy in different ways, maybe. I know my wife and I are one of hundreds of thousands of parents that has a similar story. And then we have a mini experiment within our home of 2 kids vaccinated to a certain point, 2 kids not vaccinated at all, not even 1, and then all kids not vaccinated after a certain point. And then we can look at data. There's other families that have that. Look at data. We can do a vaccine, non-vaccinate study, but these companies don't want to do it. Again, I'm going to go back to 9 billionaires in 10 months of this COVID vaccine, and that tells you a lot, in my humble opinion, when you're looking at motive. And that should be allowed to ask these questions.
And people need to know that that they have recourse, but it's limited. And I'm just continually stunned by how the CDC has become politicized to the point where they're no longer involved in I shouldn't say involved, no longer sufficiently concerned, it seems to me, about the true healthcare impact of their politicization, and it's pretty dramatic. Look, they're always, and this is fascinating, the VAERS system is a CDC system.
Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System.
And they constantly throw it under the bus. Well, anybody can put a report on VAERS, which is true. Correlation is not causation. That's true.
Yeah.
But the whole point of the system, which is a CDC system, and I want to point this out, is to aggregate data. And if you have the emergence of safety signals beyond a certain point, then the CDC should and must investigate by law. By law. And that's number one. Number two, it is the CDC's responsibility and medical officials. It is by law their responsibility to maintain that system. So if they're bitching about the fact that, well, anybody can put in a report on there, it is their responsibility to vet that information. And they're not doing it. That's the point. They're in violation of law. And so the same law that protects the vaccine manufacturer, my point is, has parameters, Nico. And so if somebody was vaccine injured and they believe they were vaccine injured, even mRNA, there is recourse. Just be ready for a long fight, unfortunately, because it ain't going to be easy. But there's absolutely recourse. There have been, the general vaccine compensation
when
fund
you say
already distributed
recourse,
billions
what do you
of dollars.
mean? Do we need to call Nico and ask him to represent?
So there's a vaccine injury compensation fund that was set up, and
There's a vaccine court.
There's a vaccine court, but it's very difficult because they use these false studies in these courts. Unfortunately, there are lawyers that specify. I've had the pleasure of meeting a number
You better
of them out of
elaborate
New
on
York.
that, on false studies. Yeah, elaborate on that.
Yeah, well,
Explain
I'm
what
not
you
going to.
mean.
Well, there's studies that have been used to deny compensation. That falsely say that vaccines aren't correlated to injuries. There's a lot of injured children, and not all of them are on the spectrum of autism. There's a lot of other. How many kids have EpiPens? And you walk into a classroom today, up to 50% of them have some type of chronic illness. Well, so that's just a different issue. But over something at some point, last time I checked, was over $4 billion have been paid out. Even though it's very difficult to get paid out from the injury compensation fund that was set up in the 80s, late 80s. But to about vaccines or about shots that don't do any harms, allegedly. Well, that's just not true. So there's just a lot of people that are ignorant to them, and there's different documentaries out there, Vaxxed and Vaxxed 2, VAXXED and VAXXED2. I think they're good.
Somebody else was mentioning another one.
Yeah, Robert Kennedy has done great. He's been, what is it, the Children's Defense Fund?
Yes, Children's Health Defense Fund.
Children's Health Defense Fund is very good. Yeah, they're very good.
They're very,
experts
very good
on their board.
Yeah, look, I'm with you. There's a lot of money and there's a lot of influence behind this, but I do think that there are things that people can do. I really do. We always advocate, just practical things, Nico.
Yeah.
We're both plant-based,
Predominantly
plant-based. The idea of supplements and exercise. There's things you can do, practical things that you can do. You need to do before mRNA.
Immune boosters, boost your immune system.
Some good probiotics.
Think about this, vitamin D. Vitamin D is the only mineral that we naturally produce if we get sun. Think about that. That's how important God wants us to have vitamin D. And if you look at people, most people, I shouldn't say all, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but most people that have chronic illnesses, disease, cancer, are deficient in vitamin D. You should know your vitamin D levels. It's good advice. Vitamin D, vitamin K is good to take with vitamin D, so it absorbs. Zinc builds up your immune system. But look, what of all the supplements that were going around when people were getting sick? Everybody said, take your vitamin D, take B12 complex, take zinc, selenium. Garlic is so good for you. NAC, all these things that build up your immune system. Every disease is from oxidative stress. We can do a whole show on oxidative stress and antioxidants and what happens and alkaline in your body and can you do it naturally and all this other stuff. Oxidative stress is ultimately the rusting of your body from the inside because you have these free radicals that are overpowering any type of good things. And I was just thinking of it. What was I just saying? I just said the word free radicals and not oxidative stress. I'll think of it in a second, but they're good for your body. So these free radicals take over and then they win out. And so you have this rusting of your body and your inside and cause disease. And there's a lot of studies on disease and what causes disease. So how do you keep your body healthy? You educate yourself and then you do the proper steps forward.
Yeah, but again, it's becoming sort of the elephant in the middle of the room. The data is emerging more and more strongly. I think it's going to be more and more and more difficult. And we had predicted this, unfortunately.
Antioxidants, thank you.
On this
Thank you,
show.
Janet.
There it is.
I just said it a second ago.
Made a full lap, right? Here it is. But we predicted this on this show. Unfortunately, you were going to have a pandemic of the vaccinated. We didn't say that to worry people. That's not what we were trying to say. We were saying the narrative was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Remember that? That was Joe Biden. And what we're actually seeing, unfortunately, is increasingly the opposite, a pandemic of the vaccinated. I mean, you remember this really is concentrated around this spike protein, Karen. Remember, originally, health officials, including the CDC, they insisted that mRNA was producing spike protein at the site of injection only. I don't know if you guys recall that. We mentioned that in here, maybe for a few hours or at most a few days. Okay. We have since discovered that spike protein can linger up to 28 days after infection, in some cases 4 months after infection. And so you can see this stuff lingering. We don't know how the body's processing it. Consequently, we don't know what the cumulative toxic effects are of this thing. We just don't know yet. But the disregard for any of that, just refusing to have the conversation, and anybody who raises the question is censored. Here's how you fight back. You guys are asking. You simply say what you say over and over and over again. But by the way, get educated.
That's right.
And I think that website is excellent. If you guys aren't following the Epic Times, you should. By the way, the Epic Times has been doing they report on political news all the time, but they've been getting better and better and better, and they've been allocating at least some articles on a weekly basis to the latest on COVID mRNA clinicals. Follow the Epic Times. Check out, like Nico said, children'shealthdefense.org. For legal issues concerning this, I think that the Pacific Justice Institute, I think, is leading the way. PJI.org. Consider following them and tracking them. There's recourse, but whatever you do, keep talking. Add your voice to the conversation. Get educated. You don't need to be a biologist to understand the basics. If you guys can follow football statistics, for goodness sakes, you can follow this. But staying silent, that's deadly.
Yeah. We're good, Karen?
We're wrapping up.
Good.
Let's
do
do it.
All right,
yeah.
guys. Thanks for joining us this week. Hope this benefited you. Look, we love people's thoughts, and we want you to share your thoughts. We like to have an opinion. We love other people to share their opinion with us, and we're just trying to critically think. We're asking questions. We're trying to model asking questions and thinking through things, because ultimately ideas have consequences. And so that's all we were trying to do. So God bless you guys. Have a blessed week. Hope share this with someone you think might benefit. Hope you're benefiting from this. And we'll see you next week, God willing.